part or final phase of our today's symposium. We have, before we introduce our keynote speakers today. Thank you so much. We'd like to thank you for patience, all the technological issues, but also to stay there to make such an interesting row of questions and observations. It was really, we were just discussing offline. It's so great to have you here. It's a global representation, different case studies. I think we couldn't wait for more than we had today. So, Eleonora, would you like to say something and speak?
Yes, thank you, Elton. So welcome to the last session. We will have the keynote address, and then we will have a final discussion around the main topic of digital vigilantism. So we're going to introduce the two speakers, the two keynote speakers for today. I will introduce the first one, and then you will introduce the second. Delia Dumitrica has joined Erasmus University's Department of Media and Communication in 2015 with a research and teaching expertise in political communication. Her research focuses on protest communication, digital activism, and the discursive construction of the political functions of new media. In addition to this, she preserves a side research interest in everyday and banal forms of nationalism.
Yes, we also have Daniel Trottier. He's an associate professor in the Department of Media and Communication at the same university, Erasmus University. Daniel's research addresses the social impacts of new technologies in daily life with an emphasis on how individuals and organizations understand how personal information and private exchanges are made public. His current focus includes the use of digital media for the purpose of expressing grievances and denouncing others. So I would like to invite you both here with us. This is such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having accepted. Always remembering that we're going to have still a final discussion after the keynote. So if you want to stay with us, please, we'd love to hear your thoughts, your inputs at the end. Thank you so much. Take it away.
Thank you.
So just change the camera so we can see the room, so we can be captured entirely, and PowerPoint. I think that's full presentation. There we go.
Right. Welcome. Thank you, everybody, and welcome to our keynote. It's an honor to be welcomed here, especially in the context of the very productive discussions we've had yesterday and today. So, looking forward to making a modest contribution to that. Today, we're going to share some preliminary findings from our project, which like many of you, remains a work in progress. So we're looking forward to that discussion aspect. Like many of you, we're focusing on the use of technologies, so smartphones and mobile internet, and seeing the way that they transform the recording of perceived injustices into mundane gestures. So the sort of ubiquity of the kinds of content that we're seeing in all these different contexts. We're looking specifically at a movement / subreddit called Eyes on Ice, which contributes to a broader mobilization in the US against the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. So we see this type of practice as a kind of hybridity, in the sense that it, in the first instance, brings together the analog and the digital, not only in terms of aesthetics. So, for example, the way that the sort of analog content or encounters are turned into objects of seeing through the camera, rendered digital, but also in terms of circulation and mobilization. And so another way of thinking about this hybridity is this idea of on the one hand, the sort of online and platform kinds of practices, aesthetics, mobilizations, but also intimately linked to the offline street level engagements in the various cities concerned. And cutting across these, as we'll see, is a sort of prominent preoccupation with visibility of both the target, who we are trying to kind of call attention to bear witness to these injustices and atrocities, but also increasingly, and I think this is where we might distinguish the Eyes on Ice case from some of the, especially kind of leaning more to the far right cases, a much greater sense of preoccupation and precarity with one's own visibility, and the kind of counter denunciation or backlash one might face. So in our empirical case, we focus on a subreddit documenting and contesting immigration enforcement. But we quickly realized, and this is something that we see in a lot of your cases as well, that there's this kind of cross-platformization of the digital content present on this subreddit. And so the fact that this subreddit only represents one digital community amongst others in the larger digital ecosystem of the sort of activist contestation of Donald Trump and his immigration policy is worth noting. But even Eyes on ICE itself, as we'll see, is not contained to the subreddit, and we'll explore the reasons for that. So as you heard in terms of our respective biographies and research interests, there is this sort of intersecting of vigilantism and activism. And we can consider some of the overlapping dimensions. We can consider also how the participants themselves in these movements would label themselves, recognizing that these are very loaded terms, also in terms of public discourse. So we are recognizing that there is a sort of heterogeneous set of actors involved, some of whom are much more invested in this movement than others. One in particular we'll see is sort of not quite the face of Eyes on ICE because they're very much faceless and sort of withdrawn, but still maintaining a kind of prominence in terms of at least putting in the work. So once again, I'll just add that this is very much a work in progress, but I will give the microphone to Delia.
Okay, well, thank you. I hope that this is good enough. And then I need the mouse as well.
Maybe this works better for
Maybe that works.
yeah.
Sounds good. Well, then we thought about starting with an example here of this intersection between digital vigilantism and digital activism in the context of our empirical case. And this is a post that is simply entitled "The ICE Murderer." It's a carousel post, you know, on Instagram, 2 slides with 2 images. And then the black frames or letterboxing with the timestamp, the crossed alarm bell, the mobile signal sign, the battery notification confirm, I don't know if you can see those details up there, confirm that this digital content has been taken or consumed on a smartphone. On a visual level, we recognize the words police. I don't know if you can see them very well there, but when we zoomed in or came closer, as we've heard a bit earlier, to the smartphone to sort of identify what's going on, the words were visible. The word was visible to us. It's a man wearing a uniform, but the post title has already framed our recognition of him as an ICE agent. Yet beyond that, we do not have further cues to help us understand why this man was foregrounded and what this post is all about. What we need to understand this post is immersion in both the Reddit forum and current events in the United States. And I think that this is important because this sense of not really understanding how we're supposed to read certain things was recurrent as we were looking through the data. We always needed to reach out for more and more context to figure out what's in there. The 2 images are in fact stills from the video of the shooting to death of Renee Nicole, who was a US citizen by ICE agents in Minnesota in January this year. And this information was also revealed in the comments on the post, which are made visible when you click on the post itself. So this is how Reddit works. The video itself was filmed by a passerby, as evidenced again through the recurrent shaky movement of the camera that we have heard so much over the past day and a half. We see passerbys going back and forth to check what has happened to this woman who had just been shot. We do not see or hear the actual shooting. The video is also posted on YouTube. And the disbelief of those who have just witnessed this is also conveyed through the audio recording of voices shouting at the police officers, cursing, quote unquote, "What the fuck?" or quote unquote, "You fucking killed her." These 2 stills, in conjunction with the post title and the flare is that purple oval, purple capsule that you see at the top, position the man as the person who has shot Renee Nicole, and the purpose of the post as both documenting the killing of an innocent woman and revealing the identity of the official who has done so. This form of revealing the identity of an ICE or police officer can be understood as both an activist tactic, particularly in the context of US politics, and the awareness of the police abuse, particularly in the aftermath of the Black Lives Matter movement. It can also be understood as a precursor of digital vigilantism, insofar as the revealing of this police officer's identity or ICE officer's identity can lead to collective forms of retribution. The identity of ICE agents or of police officers during policing actions has become an object of discursive struggle in the United States. In fact, the second most popular video in the Reddit forum at the time of our data collection was a news clip from a press conference where the ICE director was addressing a journalist's question about agents wearing masks. ICE agents, he states, were being doxxed after an operation in Los Angeles, quote unquote, from the press conference. People were taking photos of the names, their faces, and posting them online with death threats to their families and themselves. So I'm sorry if people are offended by them wearing masks, but I'm not going to let my officers and agents go out there and put their lives on the line, their families on the line, because people don't like immigration enforcement. End of quote. And after this statement, the guy refuses any more questions and leaves the room. Now, while Republicans and ICE officials claim masks are a form of protecting officers, Democrats and anti-ICE protesters argue masks allow ICE to act with impunity. I was also thinking about this in the context of one of our previous presentations where we saw the superheroes also wearing masks. This is not okay. A female voice is heard in the background of this video that you see on this slide. So far in this video, we have seen dash cam footage from a car, and we have seen a man taking his toddler to daycare, and then the police stopping them and starting to aggressively ask questions. The woman that we hear corresponding to these stills here says, "And no one here," in reference to the ICE agents, police officers, "will identify themselves to me." She continues, "They came in. You are not okay. This is not okay." And meanwhile, the officers are moving away from the camera and from her, but she follows them, continuing to say, "This is not okay. This is not okay." The identity of police officers, especially while on duty, is both a matter of democratic accountability for state institutions and a reflection of the wider social and political polarization in the US. In turn, this makes the issue a moral and highly emotional battlefield.
Yeah, so we engage in a digital ethnographic analysis of this subreddit, and also going beyond the walls of the subreddit. And we, within that, conduct a qualitative analysis, which Delia will say a bit more about later. But I think it's useful to also, for those who might not be as familiar, introduce some of the particularities about Reddit as a platform. One that's quite prominent in terms of speaking for a kind of public discourse in a lot of different contexts. So Reddit consists of seemingly self-contained communities based on geography, based on hobbies, based on political views. Because of the polarized nature of so much of public discourse, you often have these kinds of fragmented or parallel sort of streams where you will have, like, within the context of the Canadian housing crisis, you have Canadian Housing 1 and Canadian Housing 2. One is woke and one is based. There's a lot of that going on. You have the posters, but you also have moderators who play this kind of quasi-curational role in terms of bringing content together and policing it to some degree based on rules, which we'll explore in a second. As is the case with many other platforms, through the architecture, through the features, and also through the affordances, content can very easily leak from the subreddits themselves to what is referred to as the front page, r/all. So if you just go to reddit.com, you will be presented with what the algorithm suspects is content that's relevant to you. Some of this might be material that you've subscribed to by joining a subreddit. In other cases, it might just kind of pop up unsolicited. And so there is a sense in which content will, by design, go beyond the confines of eyes on ice. And that seems to be the intention here for the main active people like Can't Stop Poppin'. It also ends up elsewhere beyond the confines of Reddit itself, so that we see that the top Google results, if you're searching for something, will often be, besides Quora and a lot of AI generated material, Reddit. And there's also this sense among a lot of extremely online people that Reddit, for all its flaws, remains one of the more trustworthy sources of information, because ostensibly there are people behind their keyboards generating this content. So some people specify that if they're looking for technical details or something that's truthful and accurate, you would add Reddit to your search engine. I was actually at a repair cafe a few months ago getting my vacuum fixed, and the person couldn't fix it, and then went to Reddit and was able to, actually still wasn't able to repair it, but like at least got as far as one could expect. So Reddit has this sort of flawed but good, the least bad alternative kind of reputation. And its reputation has had to be rehabilitated over the last 15 years because historically it is associated with a lot of fairly problematic content in terms of skirting with child sexual exploitation, skirting or flirting with a non-consensual sexual images of women, gender-based hatred. There was the Donald during Trump's first presidency, which was sort of a mainstay for a while. And it's seemed to, Reddit has kind of gotten rid of many of those communities and has implemented what they refer to as Reddicate. So they have, I think, a firmer sense of governance in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. But there's also this sort of more soft form of governance, which seems to trickle down into the community rules. So once we look at these rules, some of this might not fully mesh with how we understand this kind of anti-ICE protest, but there's an explanation for that.
We have encountered Eyes on Ice as a Reddit forum. We had been aware of digital content documenting ICE arrests and recommending tactics of resisting ICE from Instagram, because my main research is around activism and it inevitably started to populate my feed. The forum's looks have changed since we first looked at it. In January 2026, it looked like what you see on the, I don't know what that side is, left-hand side. The new visual identity is this one. So in April, when we looked again, the visual identity had changed. It's more elaborate. It visually depicts the idea of watching through the pair of eyes, combining it with that of protesting, and importantly for our interest in the normalization of smartphones as an activist tactic, this ubiquity of smartphones rather than protest signs, because I don't know if you can see the details, but the silhouettes are holding smartphones rather than protest signs. It also includes an explanation of what the subreddit really represents, a civil rights community, and the slogan, open hearts, open minds. The group self-description afforded by the Reddit functionalities has also changed since January. Now the subreddit makes a claim to being a global community rather than the focus on quote unquote tracking immigration policies, advocating for human rights and fostering dialogue, which was the initial description. It now positions itself as monitoring immigrant enforcement for quote unquote transparency and accountability. So the new description also draws the framework for what can be posted: verified reports, real-time footage, and critical news. Though I have to wonder who verifies the reports and how, because we haven't seen direct evidence. At least the digital traces do not provide an evidence of that. Interestingly, the engagement metrics of the subreddit have decreased substantially since January, and maybe this is likely due to changes in subreddit measurements. Yet, even though the subreddit is linked to a grassroots reaction against the anti-immigration policies of Trump's second presidency, particularly the deployment of ICE or US Immigration and Customs Enforcement Forces, hence ICE, to actively arrest and deport immigrants, resistance to anti-immigration policies in the US has a longer history. Eyes on ICE in particular was proposed as a hashtag back in 2017 under the first Trump presidency by Witness Media Lab, which appears to be a non-governmental organization devoted to video documentation of human rights abuses, who has worked with other defense collectives and civil society actors across the US to develop legally sound informational materials for how immigrants and their allies can protect their rights. So these are examples of such materials. Digital materials provide instructions for how to film an ICE arrest. And I'm going to quote from some of these documents. It is legal to film ICE in public as long as you do not interfere. You can observe and document agents' behavior, but stop filming if the person being targeted requests you to do so. Film key details such as law enforcement badges, uniforms, license plates, weapons, communications between agents, property damage, etc., etc. Or another piece of advice, make it easier for investigators, journalists, or lawyers to verify your videos by filming street signs, buildings, and landmarks. So maybe verification is also connected to the details that you're supposed to film to assess the veracity of your filming. Such training materials circulated within digital networks connecting citizens and civil society actors, and they provide a larger context for understanding not just the transformation of visual recording through smartphones into a mundane form of citizen participation and activism, but also they shed light into these shared aesthetic patterns for such recordings.
So as I mentioned, Reddit is known for its community-enforced moderation, and each subreddit is expected to develop and enforce their own posting rules, which are clearly shaped by Redicket and some of the platform-wide values. And the idea here is if these rules are not being abided by, if there's a sense of either a lack of moderation or poor moderation, these groups can be shut down. And so this sense of a kind of vulnerability vis-a-vis the platforms that you depend upon to get the word out is a perennial preoccupation. And so we see on the Eyes on ICE subreddit, there's quite a few rules, 15 in total. I think half of them are concerned with an emphasis on civil and productive discourse, so respectful discourse and fact-based discussions, content moderation, compassionate language, straw man alerts, no ad hoc attacks. There's some that also focus on networks and vulnerability in particular. So we don't need to dwell on that too much. But the sense of strategic visibility is also very evident here. And the one rule that we're still kind of stuck with is the sense of no witch hunting and doxing. And it's important to note that witch hunting has a particular sort of definition in terms of this kind of persistent and disproportionate persecution of someone within Reddit parlance. Doxing, it's fairly well known, but it's also a fairly contested term, similar to cancel culture, where depending on where you stand on a particular issue, especially within such a polarized context, what one person might call doxing or cancel culture, another person might call accountability or justice. And so this sense of what constitutes doxing and what doesn't seems to be, hasn't led to any threat to the community yet, but we can see that being an issue that comes up. Similar to, as an example, there was an individual who was tracking Elon Musk's private jet using publicly accessible information, and then Elon referred to this as his assassination coordinates, and so that was sort of the discursive shift to eventually get that removed. So this sense of what constitutes doxing and what doesn't, we get a sense from what Delia just mentioned in terms of how this might be carved out. But when we look at some of the, especially the top posts that are very prominent here, we might wonder whether or not this really aligns with these actual rules. And so again, without actually speaking with these people, at least yet, we can speculate whether or not there is a firm commitment to these rules, or if there is something, a sense of performative compliance, again, because of this very real sense of vulnerability, especially as like knowing the sort of the kind of vibe shift that we had when Mark Zuckerberg and everybody else was sort of aligned with Trump during the second administration, to recognize that we've always been on borrowed land with these platforms, but all the more so now. We can look at other types of features which play certain roles. So Delia already mentioned the use of flair. So these little kind of tags that you have at the top of a post that can indicate, oh, this is humorous or this is not safe for work. And Can't Stop Poppin', who is sort of the, again, the faceless face of Eyes on Ice, despite taking this very explicit digital nomad approach, puts quite some effort into setting up these flares and provides this update saying, I put this time into having an additional flare for all 50 states. So that means we have a clean, searchable way to track cases, alerts. So to treat this as this kind of repository to kind of bear witness on a state-by-state basis of the kinds of harms and atrocities. And you get this sense in which, from the way that Can't Stop Popping is talking about it and the subsequent lack of compliance with the flares, that it's a bit like herding cats, trying to get all these different people who are more or less invested in both the Reddit community and Eyes on and sort of anti-ICE protests more generally. There is a sense of a general non-compliance or ignoring it. And of course, yeah, we can speculate that many participants do not prioritize the normative use of Reddit when engaging, and that's fair enough in the shadows of something much more serious and much greater gravitas. But Can't Stop Poppin' also talks about the effective use of titles. So this kind of strategic use of producing content which corresponds to these kinds of aesthetic expectations, which not only serve a kind of informative function within the confines of Eyes on Ice, but also helps this content go beyond and sort of reach other people outside of the subreddits. So we see here this kind of platform disciplining reflecting both Reddit's own protocols, but also with a clear purpose about witnessing and organizing. We can also look at some of the other particular aspects of Reddit posts. So you have posts which consist of images, text, etc. And then you have comments, and there's often comments which become sticky. So they're sort of pinned to the top, either because sometimes this is done automatically. In other cases, a comment gets kind of upgraded to the top. And we can see the way in which this has happened, where I think in this first case, this was like the moderator, who is most often Can't Stop Poppin', upgraded Can't Stop Popping's kind of comments about sort of bearing witness and recognizing the historic gravitas of the kinds of footage we're looking at here. And so what you see here is a sense of mixing media practices, making content visible, and especially this sort of imperative kind of compelling the person reading this, whoever they may be, not just to share it with like-minded individuals, but to share it with your neighbors, to share it with your problematic uncle, to the sense of bearing witness to what's going on here. And despite seeing this case as fairly unique, at least within the American context, this echoes a lot of what I saw our colleagues write about in the wake of the Charlottesville Unite the Right rally, where there was explicit sort of fascist kind of chanting and this sort of momentum. And so in particular, Tara Milbrandt and David Douglas respectively have chapters in a open access book on vigilant audiences that sort of unpack the kind of, the justification to engage in this kind of disproportionate doxing and persecution of individuals based on these moments, which will surely appear in history textbooks if we have history textbooks in the future. We see other sticky comments as well. So this is an example where The auto moderator, which again I think is configured by Can't Stop Popping, responds to Can't Stop Popping because most of the content is from them. But it's this message ostensibly to the person posting, but it's visible to everybody, and speaking to this kind of strategic use of visibility and being very mindful of the way you not just dox your political enemy, but more importantly, allies and yourself. So making explicit reference to OPSEC, to making use of, consistent use of pseudonyms across platforms to be reachable without having this vulnerable identification. Being careful about identifying others, and it sort of configures over time so that we see more recently it links to this Ko-fi or Coffee account, which seems to be kind of a site of sites that Can't Stop Popping / Eyes on Ice has established, where I think it's quoted as even saying like, you can establish connection here so that if one channel goes down, you can find us elsewhere. So what we observe is that there's an especially strong preoccupation with having multiple sites, not just for monetization, not just for clout or for the attention economy, but recognizing that at any point one might go down and this movement will have to carry on. So yeah, the sense of self-protection being very prominent here. And so with a lot of this in mind, before we get into sort of the proper kind of content analysis, we've sort of vacillated a bit between referring to this as activism or vigilantism, setting aside what our participants might consider what their work consists of. And so we can consider like the wider political context in the US with the resulting civil society mobilization together with the specificities of Reddit as a social media platform. And so, in other words, technology use becomes normalized as a mundane gesture of speaking truth to power, to bearing witness. And so we can see how monitoring state institutions and officials can be both an activist tactic, it's very much within that wheelhouse, but also a form of vigilantism. And so if we look at beginning with some basic like non-disciplinary definitions of activism and vigilantism, we can make a distinction that activism is typically seen as an attempt to transform society, while vigilantism is more a matter of achieving justice or retribution. These sometimes align, these sometimes don't. And so with activism, it's primarily, especially recently in new social movements, et cetera, a lot of non-violent forms are kind of rising to the surface. And so the sense of citizen participation in politics being a cornerstone of democracy, whereas vigilantism is seen as an ethically, not necessarily always problematic, but it's at best in a kind of gray area of retribution, which is often at odds with other cornerstones of liberal democracy, in particular the rule of law. And so if you're familiar with the literature on vigilantism, you might know that most typical vigilantes support at least a kind of hegemonic state regime, the order of things, but consider the state to be unable to adequately respond to some sort of threat. And as a result, it might be ethically permissible to take matters into one's own hand via either physical violence or cultural violence. And so what I find striking from the presentations we saw today is that there are certain cases which we would probably, in our heart of hearts, kind of align with, and others which seem quite striking, but that the participants in these cases, and here I'm thinking of especially the sort of cow protection vigilantism, it's easy to look at this as, civil conflict and sort of anti-Muslim persecution, but this sense of people are not just performatively kind of kissing the cow in the music video, even though that is a performance, there's an aesthetic component, but there probably is a deeply rooted belief that, we can almost run parallel to the sense of, the persecution of your neighbors, this kind of terror. And so with this idea of this kind of ethical permissibility, we can look at especially the the types of harms that have gone unpunished for a long time that we would say, based on our commonly held values, we would see this as problematic. And in particular, thinking about in the lead up to the Me Too movement, the sort of persistent and unpunished sexual harassment and violence against women in a number of different domestic and professional spheres. So someone like Harvey Weinstein, where it was the worst kept secret in Hollywood that he was a sort of persistent, long-standing predator, and nothing happened until this kind of, very strategic use of media to denounce Weinstein, but other predators as well. And so it can very much become justifiable. And I think, we very much see this in Patricia's case of activism and or doxing. So this sense of aligning activism with vigilantism and where one ends and one begins is something that we don't want to get sort of too bogged down in the concepts, but we are considering that.
So what we've done is, for our empirical material, is we carried out a qualitative/multimodal analysis of the top 100 posts, including video content, and we sorted by top, which means most upvotes regardless of downvotes of all time, in order to identify the most prominent and resonant messages from Eyes on Eyes community. And we started by doing the analysis based on the caption, and whenever needed, we also looked for more support to understand what the caption was all about in the video or the image. And the analysis is a bit of a work in progress, but based on half of the data that we have analyzed so far, we have seen patterns already, and we have already identified 3 communicative functions to unpack: witness abuse, reveal the enemy tactics, and mobilize against it. And I'm going to try to go one by one and show you some examples. So cluster 1 is witnessing, which refers to documenting harm and abuse by ICE agents. The first post in the subreddit at the time of our data collection falls within this category. You see it here on this slide. And it's important because it suggests this type of content elicits most engagement in the subreddit. Indeed, we checked today, a few days ago, and another post made it to the top. So it replaced this one, but it is also about how ICE arrests break up families. So what else has been witnessed? Arresting people or the impact that it has on their families, violence against protesters, including this post confronting an ICE officer for allegedly sexually assaulting a protester because they have, quote unquote, grabbed her tit, or this post where an officer pushes a man who is filming them to the ground just as a bus comes from the opposite direction, or this post filming an arrest inside a home where the woman is not cooperating and the officers punch her, trying to physically subdue her. The titles of such posts moralize the incidents as an abuse of power. Now, such videos are often raw, as has often been the case with the presentations that we heard throughout the day and a half, filmed by someone sitting on the margins. Most are unedited and are often filmed with a handheld camera, smartphone, that takes quite awkward shots sometimes, as you see in the stills that I put on this slide. Sometimes it cuts off the heads of the people, so it looks amateurish. While this can connote this amateur filming, we have also seen explicit recommendations from NGOs and collectives supporting immigrants to avoid revealing the identity of immigrants when filming an arrest. This is not the case here, however. Yet some elements remain troublesome. There is little information on who these people are, why they have gathered here, what happened before and after the act of filming. In this video, we hear people shouting, which is an important and recurrent feature across our sample and obviously across the cases that we have also heard about in the symposium. But they also signal this live or raw documentation of reality. One person from the sidewalk, in the case of this video, instructs the others to, quote unquote, take a picture of this, pointing to the license plate of the van in which ICE agents are getting up. Others continued to shout, "Hey, hey, hey," presumably to get the attention of the ICE officers and prevent them from driving away in the car. And as the camera slides to the right, we see why others are shouting, "Hey, hey, hey," because a man is standing in front of the van. He is also filming with his own smartphone. It is interesting to note here the ubiquity of filming with one's smartphone as a gesture of challenging power structures, or imagined to do so. This has become a well-documented activist tactic, recording the grievance in everyday life, but also the way in which the threat is cast against those with power, like the police, the army, the rich. The threat in question is that their abuse will be revealed. It will be made known publicly, not just through filming it, but through an imagined expectation that sharing such content via social media platforms or voice over IP is going to create virality and thus render the injustice visible. As the ICE agent pushes the man, he falls down and we hear someone, possibly the person recording, yelling desperately, "What the fuck? What the fuck is wrong with you? Are you trying to kill him? Fucking coward." And I brought these up because these are recurrent voice or audioscapes. Note how both ubiquitous the recording of injustice has become and how the documentation of details that could, in an ideal scenario, lead to identifying the alleged perpetrators has become a reflex. This audio element is recurred across our data. People shout at ICE agents, often using phrases like fuck you. Such reactions convey genuine disbelief, and when combined with the increased raise in pitch and speed of talking, they further communicate an exponential growing of emotional tension experienced by those observing the events and therefore by us consuming them. It is perhaps interesting to note here that we cannot truly hear what the ICE agent is saying, but the way they remove this man from from in front of their car seems violent. To someone who is not part of the events, the drama about the bus, which appears able to stop within a safe distance from the man, who is already getting up and moving out of the way of the bus, can often appear performative. The man does not seem to be hurt because he continues to talk to the ICE agents as the car leaves, long after the bus disappears from the frame. Now, this interpretive viewpoint is important because despite the wider claim of the subreddit that such videos merely document reality and therefore represent the truth, such videos remain open to interpretations, to competing interpretations. And as I mentioned during the analysis, we often felt that without being ideologically aligned with opposition against ICE, the videos would not convey, quote unquote, absolute proof of an injustice. In fact, we can reflect more on the performative aspects of this video. The post title that you see here, sorry, I lost my track of thought. The post title gives no context for the events themselves, but together with the flair chosen, this magenta bubble reading "ICE is" clown emoji, it ideologically frames the interpretation of the events captured. A prevalent tactic for these videos is also the use of subtitling, with text being strategically positioned on the video, such as the example of this slide. And again, I realize how repetitive these things are, really talking about a shared pattern because we have also seen them across the other presentations. Just like in the previous example, the person filming explicitly indexes his own documentation role. Quote unquote, "I am moving, I'm just watching you fucking document crimes that you're committing," end of quote. And just like in the previous example, the audio is very noisy. We hear people yelling, banging things, car alarms are on. The police is also using megaphones to announce that they are raiding the community. And the audio is loud and it is scary and it is oppressive, matching these images of ICE agents in full gear with gas masks covering their faces, carrying weapons. In other cases, the subtitles use formatting like color or bold to mark phrases and words uttered by either the protesters or the ICE agents. And the formatting supports the moralizing effort of the caption, visually marking the evidence that you're supposed to get for the position expressed in the caption or the post title. Such formatting tactics also evidence the cross-platformization of the production and circulation of digital content. TikTok, for example, has made such titling not just possible, but recommended as a digital marketing strategy for accessibility and professionalization of videos. And indeed, in many cases, we have seen in our sample cross posts from TikTok or from Instagram or even from X. The second cluster talks about evidence mobilization communicative function. It's evidence of citizen resistance against ICE and the immigration enforcement policy. And this type of evidence can be mobilizing in the sense of giving a sense of what other citizens could do about this situation. And mobilization for the resistance can take various forms. Protests and blockades, or illegal and violent yet less serious actions like rock throwing at ICE vans. But resistance can also come from professionals such as the police, as in this post about a local Portland cop who appears to threaten an ICE agent with arrest if they don't leave the protesters alone. Or this post about medical professionals who refuse to give details about their patients to ICE agents. The titles of such posts often name the act of resistance: block, hold the line, stand up, demand, form legionary wall, shield wall, throw rocks, and provide details on the location where the resistance took place. In some cases, the choice of words is celebratory, as in the case of choosing the verb stand up or confront. Such titles often use the us versus them frame, as the protesters block ICE or New Yorkers confront ICE or protesters force ICE agents back. On a few but rare occasions, the posts in the subreddit are humorous. Here is an instance of such humor where citizen mobilization, making fun or laughter, and digital vigilantism intersect. It's a photo of ICE agents in what looks like an airport, transformed through the humorous text suggesting one way of resisting ICE is to limit their opportunities for sex. The caption of the post adds another interpretive layer, connecting the macro to incel communities and creating a pun by merging incel with ICE. This macro is also likely to be a repost, as it includes a social media handle that was blurred here for ethical reasons and a logo. But beyond this funny layer, recommendations to capture and make public the identity of ICE agents is recurrent across our sample, taking various forms. As we have shown in the beginning of our presentation, protesting citizens often demand things like the name or the badge numbers, especially during arrests or violence against protesters. I'm also wondering how we are doing with time, because I know that we have a schedule. What do you guys think? Okay, sounds good. So then we can take another 10 minutes to wrap it up. What do you guys think? Or is it, yeah? Okay, let me take a quick look here and see. Maybe I skip over the last cluster. The last cluster had to do with reveal, which had to do with the documentation of the enemy, meaning ICE, and the tactics of this enemy. I'm not going to talk too much about them, but such tactics involved things like sort of naming some of the things that the ICE agents were doing to instill fear in the community, or how ICE agents are pursuing children to gather their biometrics, or arresting US citizens and then refusing to give information about that, or even going through the yearbooks from high schools to identify some ICE agents. And then here in this cluster, we've also seen quite a lot of examples that come the closest to digital vigilantism. Maybe I say just a few words about this one because it's relevant in that context. This is a video, a very long video, is 8 minutes long. It's one of the longest that we have seen so far, where we see this protester, we don't see, but we hear the protester approaching these individuals, 3 people in civilian clothes, sitting at the table, having a coffee. This woman approaches them, and again, you have to know the context, because she keeps on asking them whether they have heard about sex pests. And you wonder, what the heck does sex pests have to do with what seems to be a subreddit about anti-immigration policies? And then you realize that there was a local incident where ICE agents had removed a banner about anti-immigration policies and have left a dildo hanging in place. Lo and behold, therefore, now we see this citizen activist, or we hear the citizen activist approaching these 3 seemingly civilians, asking them if they know about the sex pests. And initially, the conversation seems to be nice, but it becomes increasingly, how should I say, not violent, verbally confrontational, where she keeps on asking them, who are you? You are ICE agents. Get the fuck out of the community. Get the fuck out of here. Get the fuck out of here. So with the stills, I try to sort of follow the process. These people initially say hi and say a few things, but then they don't want to engage with the citizen and they leave. She follows them throughout quite a few streets until they get into the car, filming the license plate. It's a very interesting combination because everything escalates on the part of the citizen activist, and the audio is what conveys this escalation. I think I can skip through this because this is something that we have seen across other presentations as well. And maybe let's quickly say something about what stands out to us from what we have seen so far. The first thing that stands out is the realistic promise of the video's images. If you look at the subreddit as a whole, it is very easy to ignore the framing work, which is dependent on ideological alignment between the viewer and the subreddit community. Instead, the posts collectively signal that given that this is raw filming, it is a capturing of reality. Therefore, what you see is what you get, and this is the truth. And post after post shows the injustice growing. But there are no questions asked about what came before or after the filming. So this is something that struck us. The second thing that we'd like to bring up is this increased epistemological and argumentative functions of details. Filming details functions as a form of telling the truth. And just because you have the details, it means this is the true, valid, trustworthy argument. The third thing that stands out to us is the politicization of identity as a path to accountability. Identity, however, is often masked. Protesters are masked, ICE agents are masked. So there is something really interesting happening here with identity becoming such an important discursive site of discursive struggle, and yet something that is increasingly policed. And finally, the last question that we raise, which echoes what we have heard so far, is about the ubiquity of violence. Violence from the protesters, violence from ICE agents. What strikes me, however, when I look at these images is that although these protesters are verbally violent, confrontationally violent, words, yells, curses, perhaps throwing rocks, pushing a fence, the ICE agents often have guns and they have machines. So there is an unbalance there. And I thought that this is an interesting juxtaposition because you have a protester who is throwing something. The ICE agents have been just blasted with paint. He's throwing something at them. The ICE agent is pointing a gun, not with real ammo, but probably something else. And then you have the women on the side filming, documenting, witnessing this. So back to that.
So in light of what we've seen in this case, we can briefly revisit our sort of conceptualization of digital vigilantism, recognizing that there's many ways to do it beyond Les Johnston's 6 dimensions. Nevertheless, they provide some grounding. So when it comes to organization, whereas vigilantism is typically planned and premeditated, it's not retribution, it's not spontaneous, there is greater spontaneity with digital vigilantism. And with Eyes on ICE in particular, there's a much lower threshold to participation, especially this idea of getting people to bear witness. It might end up on your front page, and this could be sort of an entry point, and you're instructed on what to do to document, to witness, to get the word out. In terms of participation, there's always been a blurring of like police participation in vigilante groups pre-internet. And here I'm thinking about something like the KKK in the United States, having off-duty police officers. And the boundaries have been blurred with the remediation of, for example, police content and vice versa. With Eyes on ICE, the fact that on a state-by-state basis, you have certain police who seem to align with ICE and in other cases are sort of working at cross purposes, combined with this kind of curational kind of approach where you can sort of take content, including in the top 100 posts, a lot of press coverage, you can kind of realign this footage. And so one of the cases, one of the bits of content we saw was the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, who is sort of commenting on this. And we can imagine that she would be sympathetic to this case, but there's an additional move that happens once you repost it under the banner of Eyes on ICE. In terms of thinking about vigilantism as a social movement, what we see here is that a lot of people who are appearing in Eyes on ICE are not necessarily aware of the existence of this group, of this subreddit. There's a much broader commitment against ICE and targeting vulnerable members of the community, and that this movement serves to make that visible. In terms of the use of violence, there continues to be a reliance on cultural violence, and namely the weaponization of visibility, but there is an even greater sense of ambivalence in terms of not going too far or being aware that you're sort of maybe breaking the rules of the platform by making, for example, using high school photos to identify police officers, but also this much greater awareness of the risk of counter denunciation against you. So you're witnessing violence, you're acting, supposedly embracing cultural violence to sort of denounce those people and call attention to them. And as a result of that, you might be a target. And so what's quite striking here too is that someone like Can't Stop Poppin', who we mentioned is sort of the faceless face of Eyes on ICE, everyone else that we've talked about for the last day and a half have been heavily gendered. I don't know if maybe you've confirmed, and of course, gender is unimportant in one sense, but it's also quite remarkable that this person investing so much time and being prominent, and their efforts are prominent in such a way, but that because of their, we can presume, survival and not wanting to have a knock on their door, remains very visible in one sense, but also very non-visible in a sense that's quite unusual for the internet these days. These last two dimensions, I think we actually see a return to old school vigilantism in the sense that while some of the ICE agents are being denounced for some sort of lower threshold offenses, there is this much greater sense of, like, when you look at the narration, that a much broader social order is under threat in terms of, especially, so many people don't recognize the legitimacy of ICE as an agency in the sense of these sort of attacks on our neighborhoods, our cities, being a very prominent theme. And then finally, in terms of the aim to reassure a population in terms of establishing crime control, what we see, at least in terms of this phase, is actually the opposite in terms of trying to trouble individuals and to get them to recognize the crisis that's unfolding. So the aesthetics here, the sort of culmination of what we've just described, seems to do the opposite, to upset people, to get them to bear witness, which again, I think we got hints of that in some of the other presentations as well. So in terms of these sort of implications in terms of these kinds of habit-based practices, what we see here, I think, across the board is a sense of digital nomadism, that no single account relies on any single platform. All the more here, and particularly by supporting an openly progressive cause on platforms which are increasingly hostile towards those. We see this sort of preoccupation with unmasking the ICE agents while remaining protected oneself. And I think that with some of the other cases like Ciccolone and others, they sort of lament some of the backlash they face, but and not to be too subjective here, but there seems to be a particular vulnerability that these participants face, like Can't Stop Popping and others. And finally, in terms of the political implications, the broader sense of polarization in America and elsewhere, we see this kind of lamenting the loss or the threat to one's homeland, one's imagined homeland, which is very clear when these people talk about their cities and communities in Eyes on Ice. But of course, in all of your own presentations and cases, there's also this sense as well that could also be diametrically opposed to the vision of America and American cities that's being put forth here. That's it for us. Thank you very much for your patience and ears, and we look forward to the conversation.